You're welcome to Asaase Radio, Beauregard Tromp. Um, for those who don't know about Beauregard Tromp, Beauregard Tromp is with the OCCRP, and the OCCRP is the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. And in recent times, we've had news publications about a number of Ghanaian politically exposed persons who have been reported to have been captured in an OCCRP report. And we just sought to get some clarity about what this organization is, what they are about, how they go about their work, how do they even select the people to place their radar on, and what it is exactly that they found out. So this is going to be the conversation we are going to be having right now. So Beauregard, once again, you're welcome to Asaase Radio.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. Happy to be here.
Great. So maybe if you could start with what the OCCRP is and does and what you do for them.
Well, firstly, it's an organization with a terrible acronym. Just too many letters in that, but yes. So what it is it's an organization which has existed for the past 16 years. And as the acronym, the mouthful suggests, we're dealing cross-border investigations. And the reason for that is we're finding the criminals within our countries are increasingly becoming more sophisticated in terms of how they steal money and where they hide their money. And so they oftentimes, and especially for us here in Africa, we find that they do not contain it to the country. They oftentimes will take it to offshore spaces. We saw that with the Panama leaks, with the Pandora leaks, all of these kind of projects. And so what we specialize in is to try and put together journalists from different countries, from different regions to work together to essentially combat these networks of criminality. And the work that I do is I'm the Africa editor at the OCCRP. I'm based in Johannesburg, South Africa. And I work with a team of journalists who act as editors situated around the continent. We have people in Senegal, we have people in Nigeria, in Kenya, Mozambique, and so forth.
So this is a group of journalists who've come together to deal specifically with organized crime, especially with regards to corruption and reporting on same. I mean, a lot of people would look at such an activity and consider it very noble and helpful as far as keeping watch on duty bearers is concerned. But again, it becomes another question of how do you finance such projects? How do you finance such investigations and reports?
Mm-hmm. So the financing comes from donors. Um, the vast majority of it comes from donors, who then support the work that we do in terms of combating corruption and accountability. And of course, we try to harness resources. So we find that, you might have a small newsroom in Accra, for instance, who have ambitions to want to investigate how did Mr. Smith get. We know we have a suspicion he had money that is hiding in London. But we're struggling to get a hold of colleagues in London, for instance, to help us with this, to look into property, for instance, and the like. And so it's that human resource that is probably the most valuable thing that we try to bring together. So it's that networking that we try to do in order to further our interests and the accountability that we do.
Beautiful. So maybe specifically into how you get to even identify the persons that you'd want to spend some time investigating the source of their wealth and why they are acquiring certain kinds of assets and why they are choosing to acquire them in certain kinds of places. Just give us a sense of your methodology.
Okay. So what we do is we start talking with point on. Let's use this project as an example. I think it's better to have a hard example to use. To buy and lock. The buy and lock starts with a leak of data. The data was pertaining to property ownership in Dubai. There's certain information which we get from that data, but the data in and of itself is not a story. There's a lot of work that has to be done. And I must tell you that we are privileged at OCCRP to have specialists like a data team. We have an entire team of people who have put together probably the most useful investigative tool I've come across, which is called Aleph. So imagine a library that essentially gives you access to information on many people, not everybody, but on many people, especially people who have been involved in criminality sometimes, sometimes have been are politicians, and also then is able to help you to draw out the links between them. So maybe it will be like, the son suddenly has a property in Miami and another property in New York and the like, and the son is like 16 years old, suspicious. So so I mean absolutely. So that's a common playbook. So we are able to. So we have these specialist people who put the data into a format that mere mortals like myself can understand. Where we can. So you and I, we know the names, right? But these guys put it in a way that we can search for it. It's like back in the day, they were teaching us about the Dewey method in libraries. So something like that, where they will show us, okay, yes, it's searchable. That's kind of in a ordered format. So it starts with that, and then we also have access to researchers. We have an entire research department who are, again, using the example of a library. It's like going into a library and saying, hey, I'm looking for a book on this. And those people have that intimate knowledge to actually direct you in the right way. So these researchers have access to a number of data sets outside even of Aleph, and they help us to find further information on the people that we're looking at. And then there's also the hard graph. So, I mean, I personally went through this data set and I looked at the number of the countries in Africa. And I searched the names. Obviously, I'm intimately familiar with some of the individuals, crooks who are infamous. But the ones that I was trying to carefully consider the crooks we don't know about, the ones who have gone under the radar. So, we would search those names and put it through our data set that we currently have. And then we're doing other searches to make sure that we're not missing anybody. So that was essentially, kind of big overview of how we went about it. And we worked, of course, with dozens of journalists from around the world, from across the continent, and of course in other parts of the world, as I mentioned.
That's quite elaborate and multi-sourcing mechanism that you're using. And I'm listening to you and I'm wondering how many countries for this particular project that you've just executed and reported on, how many countries did you look at, and in total, how many persons from these various countries?
Don't have that number offhand, but I can tell you that we looked at more than 100 countries. In Africa alone, we looked at, there were people from just about every country, even like really poor countries like Burundi or Malawi. You find that there's people there owning properties in Dubai. And I must point out that there's nothing wrong with that per se, yeah? There's nothing criminal with owning a property in Dubai. Maybe we know somebody in media owns a property in Dubai. But where it is of particular interest is when you have unexplained wealth which seems to have paid for that property. That is what raises suspicion. And look, the project that we have done is a cut. It is a pointer to certain people, to certain institutions, but it is not the end of the project. We will point out and ask questions in some instances, as we did in some of the Ghanaian examples, without necessarily having told that entire story. So it is to draw your attention, with the hope being that our colleagues in the various countries like Ghana will take a deeper look into these things and probe these individuals, and also look further at the data, because there's a lot more that we haven't spoken about. We took a very conservative approach in terms of how we went and identified the individuals.
So in essence, the work you've done is only indicative and not conclusive about any form of wrongdoing.
For some people, yes. We are asking questions. Let me give you an example, if I may.
Yeah.
And I don't want to skip ahead. If I'm sure you were probably heading that way, Benjamin. But when you have an individual who owns more than 20 properties in Dubai, and this person is supposed to be a public elected representative and does not have a business which seems to indicate the ability to afford said properties, that is of serious concern. And when we ask them the question and they don't reply, that raises even greater suspicion. Um, and I mean, you will know, of course, that in our country, as we have in most democracies, there is accountability required from our elected individuals. There is a reporting requirement from them. Local media in Ghana actually pointed to this just last year, that I think at one point less than 7% of MPs actually declared their assets. Um, and I'm sure that people who look to these politicians would ask serious questions of them, and demand accountability from them, especially when we are entrusting them with so much of our public um, monies to, of course, better the conditions in our individual countries.
And I'm listening to you, and for instance, you talk about the example that you cite. That takes me straight into the Ghana specific instances. A number of names have been captured in your report. One of them, prominent, is a former member of parliament for Tamale Central, Mr. Inusa Fuseni. And you talk about somebody owning in excess of about 20 properties in Dubai, being a public representative, so it raises concern. Let's talk about the specific instance of Mr. Inusa Abdullah Mr. Fuseni. Your report indicates that he has property to the tune in excess of 7 million US dollars. Could you give us further breakdown about that?
Yeah, so we found these properties in clusters, So what people often do is they'll look at a development that's coming up, and they'll buy a number of properties. We found a number of PEPs, and in some cases people who had been convicted criminals, buying these properties in clusters. So he bought 4 properties, for instance, at the one, which is at Jumeirah Village Triangle. Each of them are valued at about 330,000 US dollars. Then we found he bought a number, again, 4 properties at Sky Central, which is a hotel. There, the properties are valued between 300 and 340,000 US dollars. Millennium Place was a number. So, I mean, look, for many people, these are just names of places, but these are relatively new places that came onto the market. We know that Dubai, of course, is one of the hottest property markets for a number of reasons. The one being, it's a good property investment because your appreciation over time, in a very short time, actually, is quite high. The second reason is that there's a lot of tax breaks, so that you essentially can live there almost rent free. The other, and probably the greatest concern for us, is the transactions which to take place. Dubai allows for opaque transactions. In fact, when we had one of our colleagues who worked on this project with us go undercover to speak to a real estate agent, and find out the ins and outs of how this can be done, they essentially make it easy for crooks to launder money through buying property. So let's say you have access to a few $1 million, maybe you have $7 million to be exact, and you need to kind of stash it somewhere safe. And you know the old saying that goes, safe as houses. Well, yeah, it doesn't get safer than this, I suppose, because Dubai has also built a reputation for protecting the interests of people who own property there, who are residents there, and of course, who are citizens there. 90% of the population in Dubai are foreign nationals. And that's for a number of reasons. Many of them, I'm sure the majority of them, for legitimate reasons. But we also find that people are using this space to launder money through property investments. So their money is tied to the property, and they are and no questions asked really. We've also found that where governments have asked for legal assistance, for instance, say they are looking into Mr. Smith, um, or maybe Mr. Fuseni, um, where they are looking for legal assistance, we find a great reluctance on the part of the Dubai authorities to actually go and provide information. And it gets even worse when you're trying to get extradition. And even countries that have extradition treaties with Dubai, they find it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to get people extradited from Dubai. So for crooks, that sounds like this is nirvana, because they can take their money, they can, and sometimes ill-gotten gains, of course, they can take that, invest it in Dubai, and they can happily sit there safe in the knowledge that the authorities will protect them.
And so, in his particular instance, you had identified more of like a spread of different property in different places in Dubai. That's one of the things that you identified, and so decided to string them together. Another thing you realized was these are properties that are relatively new, so likely to be acquisitions made not so long ago. And then you looked at the profile of the person, especially given as this person was a representative in parliament. Ordinarily, is not expected to have as much wealth to be able to acquire such property. The reason for which you triangulated and angled on him. Um, he has even come up subsequently after your report came out to indicate that it is not true. Indeed, he has indicated that he's not connected to these properties. How certain are you about your sources to give you the confirmation that these properties are actually owned by? Did you see any documentation to back the rights and obligations over these properties?
The people who we mentioned and the properties that we tie to them specifically are all based on documentation. This is not somebody who whispered in my ear, or even two or three people. This is the property registry from Dubai, which then shows the individual, their and their details, their personal details, including their passport numbers, which then links them, and dates of birth, etc. And we then did further verification, and that is one of the things that OCCRP is particularly rigorous about, is the verification. We take a very conservative view in terms of what we publish, because we want the information that we put out there to be um, actionable and wholly verifiable. So we are absolutely certain and stand behind our reporting. The processes, and I think it's important for your audience to understand the processes that we follow. And people within journalism in particular will know this. So conventionally, what happens within a newspaper, for instance, you'll have 6 sets of eyes at least who sees the story and goes through the story before you actually publish. OCCRP, it starts off with a journalist. It starts and then it proceeds to an editor. It passes over to an investigative editor further. It then has another investigative editor who follows it. So now already that's 4 sets of eyes. From there we have two co-editors, so now it's 5 and 6, and then we also have a fact checker. We have a fact checking department who then goes through the entire story, and you have to substantiate every single thing that you have said, there has to be verifiable proof which we record and keep on record. And then, of course, ultimately it goes to the editor in chief, who then has a final say and, of course, can make any changes that they need to. So the process is extremely rigorous in before we publish, and which gives us surety in terms of what we put out there.
So what you're in essence saying is you check from multiple sources and you validate each source with documentary evidence because you are very conservative in what you publish, and until you are virtually certain and having those certainties premised upon documentation, you do not go to press with these publications.
Absolutely correct. And may I also add that in terms of the people who we selected for for this project and whose names we put out there, we could have put out a number of other names. And we actually had a number of engagements beforehand as to who we should include in this list. And like I said, very conservative in what we did here, because we know, of course, the impact of putting names up and putting a spotlight on them, putting them up for scrutiny. So again, very conservative. We focused on people with a record. We focused on peps, and then again, it's not enough to just be a politically exposed person, but it must also be that we can. There's a high degree of certainty that or no obvious way that this person could have afforded this this property. Um, so again, we were very careful about this.
And when you look at the Ghana story specifically, again, aside from, I think the total amount that you were looking at in terms of assets relating to Ghanaians was in excess of 8 million US dollars. And Mr. Inuk Husseini specifically is of great interest because of the in excess of 8 million properties worth to the tune in excess of 7 million associated to him alone. Um, the other three people who are mentioned include a former Supreme Court justice, a former, staff of the Electoral Commission, and another person who was in the previous government, Mr. Moses Asaga. When you look at the number associated with someone like Mr. Moses Asaga, it looks very minute, minimal in the just somewhere less than even 100,000 US dollars, for instance. I mean, how then do you consider such a person relevant to place such much of a radar on? Do you have any materiality thresholds in your considerations?
Again, we look at salaries, for instance, that people earn. We consider the positions that they hold in government or in institutions of government, and the authority which they wield. And we also then would look at, and this is not specific to the justice, but we would also look at incidents, timelines. For instance, you look at timelines and you look at when the purchases took place and what might have happened in or around the time the purchase took place. So you might find a minister, for instance, who played a key role in awarding a contract. Let's, for argument's sake, say the contract was worth $100 million. And then 3 months later, we find them buying an apartment that costs $500,000, so we would look at those kind of things. So yeah, those were the key considerations in terms of their salaries, in terms of do they have other businesses, for instance? Do they have a family that are part of the purchase and form part of the ownership? And of course, the authority that they wield in terms of what do they decide over, what do they stand well, for lack of a better word, in judgment of. Hmm.
So, in the case, for instance, of Mr. Moses Asaga, who used to be with the National Petroleum Authority, as a CEO, then it means, for instance, he may have influence when it comes to procurement decisions and all of that. So, you decided to look at him. Two other people were mentioned as well. As I did indicate earlier on, there's Joseph Kweku Asamoah, who is a former finance director of the Electoral Commission, and then also a former Supreme Court Justice, Justice Anthony Alfred Benning, who were also mentioned. There have been certain issues raised with, for instance, your report, and you hear someone like Mr. Inus Afuseni saying that this report, the people who were targeted and the timing of the release of the report is really intended to be a distraction, so as to distract people's attention from the current situation of the Ghanaian economy, for instance, because they view this as a political machination, for instance, so that attention is rather placed on former appointees of government as opposed to focusing on the current government. I mean, for you sitting where you are as the Africa editor of the OCCRP, how do you take such feedback coming from someone that you have investigated, and what is your exact response to such a claim?
Two things. First thing is it's disappointing for people to have such a lowbrow response to this kind of work. I mean, if they should consider that this project is launched as part of an international consortium, and only if you think about it reasonably. So when we have 4 Ghanaians mentioned here, did Mr. Fuseni really think that we're timing this to go and mess with Ghanaian politics? When we published more than 100 other names around the world, but we were targeting Ghana specifically. I mean, that's a bit incredulous. So that's the one thing. Secondly, we the work that what would be better if Mr. Fuseni had taken the time and the energy to respond to our queries, to try and offer a reasonable explanation as to why his names are linked to these properties. And that is problematic. It's now that people are taking note of it in Ghana, he feels the need to try and rubbish this. He should be. It would be useful if he could actually direct his attention to responding to the actual claim being made against him. And if he claims that a mistake has been made, it would be wonderful to engage with him on that, as we have previously tried to do. So no, we and just for the record, there are a number of other Ghanaians in the report. So the total value of the assets held by Ghanaian nationals is not $8 million. It is significantly more than that. So Mr. Fuseni, of course, features prominently. And yeah, I think it would be useful if he actually offered people a reasonable explanation. We have no interest, no ambition in trying to distract people. And if we were trying to distract people from the economic situation in Ghana, um, you know, it's difficult to time these things. So why there's no reason for us to I mean the reason for the publication date, it's something that was set months before the time. And it was agreed with partners who are sitting in South America, in Europe, in Asia, in Southeast Asia, across Africa. And so it is not something which we had, and the reason for it was simply that we allocated a time for this project to be done. And then we allocated a specific day, which would coincide with, which would work for the publishing partners, so that we can have maximum impact with the stories that we had to do. The considerations were, and those were all the considerations, and it was really just logistical, not further than that.
Indeed. And one of the things that, again, and we make reference to Mr. Inus Afuseni because he's the one so far of the 4 who has provided any form of reaction to the report. And he talks about the fact that these claims go to the very personality and reputation that he holds and has built over the period. And so he's referring this matter and the various allegations to his lawyers, and they are going to be taking some action in respect of that. Has any of his assigned lawyers or agents reached out to your outfit for any further engagement in respect of this matter so far?
We have not seen any correspondence, but we look forward to engaging with them on the matter.
Indeed. And for the benefit again of our audiences, what is the frequency of such investigative reports coming from the OCCRP?
Large-scale projects like this, in a year, we sometimes have done up to 4 big projects like this, where we have more than 50 partners, for instance. In previous years, we did a project called Swiss Secrets, for instance, where we examined information about people who had essentially used the very opaque banking system in Switzerland to pass monies through those bank accounts. And I mean, some of them are infamous individuals like Sani Abacha from Nigeria, who of course is deceased. But some of them are more current guys, like a crook who worked for Siemens, the electronic giant and engineering giant, whose name is Seidel, Edward Seidel, a German individual who had used the bank account over there to funnel all kinds of money to all kinds of places. So there were all these kind of individuals who we actually exposed in that. And then, of course, we were involved in the Pandora leaks. We did another big project about the Gambia, which was essentially about how Yahya Jammeh went and um, and and stole so much money in excess of $400 million from his own country. Um, and so, I mean, those are the kind of stories that we do continually. And throughout the year, I mean, last year alone, we published in excess, I believe it was in excess of 130 stories. Um, but these kind of big projects, as you can imagine, it takes incredible energy and incredible coordination across many regions, many continents to pull this kind of manpower together. So it's not something we take on lightly, and of course we have to make sure that it is worth the effort of all of the institutions involved.
And we would want to really thank you for making time to talk to us to bring a lot more clarity to your recent reports. And we are very grateful that you spoke to Asaase Radio. And we've been talking to Beauregard Tromp, who is the Africa editor for the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. And he's currently based in South Africa. Beauregard, once again, thank you very much for talking to us.
Absolute pleasure, Benjamin. Thank you.
Great.